I don't care if you young, old, just coming out, coming back out. The record. If you ain't got that record, always about the record.
What's up, y'all? This is Timbo King, and this is the Timbo King live show. Today's special guest, we have hip-hop journalist Bonz Malone. Bonz, what's good, family?
Good to see you, man.
Everything great, man?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming down to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice.
Hip-hop journalist Bonz Malone, man.
Yeah, man.
Man.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Classic writer. Well, you started off at Spin, what it was, Double XL?
I actually started off at RAL.
Russell Associated Label?
Russell Associated Label.
RAL, for people that don't know.
Yeah, that was like a little industry in itself. Everybody who worked there, you know, went on to work at different labels and stuff like that. We're talking 87, 88. I just came out of high school. So, you know, phonetically spelling stuff as I did in Spin.
So Spin was a rock
first,
magazine?
It was a actual an alternative rock magazine.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a Rolling Stones competition. So
you used to be a writer for that, meaning for the groups of alternative rock bands?
No, actually I was writing about hip hop there, you know,
Okay.
but they found out about me from doing the biographies for RAL. You know, that was actually my first job, and then...
So you mean to tell me you did the bios for the artists on RL?
Yeah.
Like, for example?
Oh, man, like, you know, Slick Rick was
Slick Rick the Ruler?
Yeah,
Wow.
Slick Rick, you know, that was the Great Adventures album.
Oh, you're funny. That was a great...
Yeah, Great Adventures.
So what you had to be with that artist at that time to get a bio? Was it a phone call? Was it a studio session? How did you translate his lifestyle to the bio?
Well, it was, you know, usually we would sit down to do the bio. So you know, sat down with Slick Rick, you know, hung out with him. He's just a great personality, great character. We hit it off right away. And did that with Third Base and a whole lot of others who just went down the line and until, you know, so I think between me and Bill Adler, who's the one who was the head of publicity, who actually brought me into the industry and introduced me to Leroy and Russell, that we carved up everything. It's just the two of us.
Was there any information in the bio that they told you to take out that they didn't want the world to know? Some artists?
Not necessarily. It was you know, there were some times when it was like, yeah, don't put that in, or it's like off the record, but for the most part, it was really straight laced. And I tell you the truth, I had to learn how to actually do that because that wasn't something that, you know, came natural to me. I knew about doing stories and interviewing people, but actually doing biographies is, you know, that's a skill by itself. So.
You went to school for journalism?
Yeah, I went to school for journalism in high school, and then I came straight out of high school into the business. And, you know, so working with Bill Adler, who has experience with the Washington Post, he had the journalistic background, so he could guide me, man. And, you know, it just worked out because...
So he was like a mentor for you at that time?
He was a great dude, and, you know, I trusted him, and he never let me down. Like, he actually told me, he said, man, you could get paid writing like this, you know, for professionally. He saw it in a high school newspaper, and he just showed up.
What high school newspaper was it?
It was a New Youth Connections. He showed up at the offices, and he was like, you know, I read this. I couldn't believe it, like, you know. And
this was within the 5 boroughs?
Within the 5 boroughs, it went to all the high schools, all the public high schools in the city, and, you know, it was just writing about social.
And Bonz Malone's was your writer?
Yeah, it was always a writer name, and even before then, when I was writing graffiti, it was always Bonz. So, you know, I had done some graffiti articles in that newspaper, so, you know, I was able to like spotlight certain things and still talk about social issues on the street. And from when he showed up and he said he saw that, and that, you know, he wanted to bring me into the industry, that just blew my mind right too.
So you are the first hip-hop journalist?
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
Quote unquote. It's, you know, I'm the first one that's down with Rocksteady. I'm the first one that's down, you know, with Zulu Nation, or, you know, affiliated with them for many years. And, you know, also Lowlifes. You know, those three.
Low lives.
Yeah, you know what
Big
I'm
up
saying?
to Thurston Howell, Rack Low. You already know what it is.
You know, those three organizations are international, and those are like the only three in hip hop. So I'm the only journalist that or writer period that's down, you know, with all three or have been for a significant amount of time. So that's why I would say, and you know, to anybody, it's like, yeah, if there is an official title, then you'd have to give it to me because I've earned that. You know what I'm saying?
So you're like the journalist of the hip hop culture, and your word is bond.
Yeah. You know what I'm
Basically.
saying? Yeah.
So if
because I
you
got
say,
the
yo, this
credibility.
album is trash, the album is trash.
Yeah, it's trash. You know what I'm saying? They could trace it back to the source with the 5 mics, you know?
So you're the inventor of 5 mics as well?
I'm one of the dudes who could validate a person with 5 mics.
So who was the first 5 mics artist that you know?
I think that was Nas with the Illmatic.
The Illmatic album.
I think Minya O is you know, Miss Info. She's credited for
Miss
that.
Info,
Yeah,
okay.
she's credited.
Early
for
info,
that.
early
Yeah.
Miss Info.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So your early days of Russell Simmons, when we was in the green room, you was telling me about the Crush Groove days.
Yeah.
Now, you were in Crush Groove?
No, I wasn't in Crush Groove. I saw Crush Groove right down the block at the Kenmore Theater on Fulton. Shout out
I
to
thought you was in
Brooklyn.
Crush Groove. No, you was in Juice.
Night. Yeah, I was in Juice.
You was in Juice, all right.
Yeah, but the Crush era, you know, the Crush Groove era, you know, came from, or RAL came out of the Crush Groove era, which, you know, Russell Simmons, Larry Ladd, or
So
Larry
those
Smith.
offices in the movie was actually his real office.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you know, it's like and those are the real acts, you know, those are the real first acts, the biggest acts. Shout out to Fat Boys, you know,
East New
Salt
York.
and Pepper. You know, that right there rocked the world because before then you had, you know, Wild Style, which is a staple. You had Style Wars, graffiti documentary. You had Beat Street. But
So
Crush
those were the
Groove-
3
those are like
independent films?
Yeah.
You say independent,
I
right?
would
Crush
say-
Groove was a major film, right?
Crush Groove was a major film, but it's not so much which one was an independent or not, that this ushered in a new era.
Okay.
Crush Groove ushered in a new era. That was a new era of music. You know what I'm saying? Up until Crush Groove, you had pretty much...
It was like, I say, not to cut your wisdom off, I would say Crush Groove was like the era of music hip-hop, and the other movies that you named was like mostly the graffiti and breakdancing.
Yeah, it's
in that form.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's an industry movie, you know. But up until that moment of Crush Groove, like the mid '80s, you know, hip hop and even rap, you know, rap groups were groups.
Yeah.
Crush Groove ushers in individual acts as well as groups, and you didn't see that before. Like LL, you know what I'm saying? LL, like the quintessential artist. Just
He was the first solo artist
Like-
on Def Jam?
LL, yeah. That to actually come out, yeah. You know, Tila Rock was the first one signed, but LL's the one that just
But it's yours,
exploded.
Tila Rock.
Yeah. You know, he was signed, but to come out, yeah, it was LL. I mean, he's a single artist. Up
So he's the
until then.
milestone of Def Jam
Yeah,
Records.
you know, Russell's first artist is Curtis Blow. He's a single act.
I thought he was the DJ for Curtis Blow.
Who? Russell?
No, Run was the DJ.
Well, Run
Curtis
they call Run the son of Curtis Blow. So that's
Okay.
that. You know what I mean? You know, there's a lot of influence there. But as far as Russell's first act, it's Curtis Blow. He signed to Mercury though. He's not on Def Jam. So he, you know,
So this is Russell management now.
yeah, this is
Management.
Russell as a manager. You know,
Okay.
he gets a pressed up copy of Christmas Rapping with Curtis Blow. He goes to a Sugar Hill party, and he tries to get DJ AJ, who was spinning there, to play the song. AJ plays the song. People start liking the song in the middle of the set. They were like, yo, you want to hear Curtis Blow do his new joint, Christmas Rap? And everybody was like, yeah. He gets up on stage. He rocks it. He gets signed like, you know, days later. And then, you know, to show love to AJ, Curtis does the song AJ Scratch. And then that
That's the origin of that record.
yeah, and then but you know, as a thank you for what he did that night in order for him to get the Mercury deal. And then AJ Scratch sells. I think that was must have been like a platinum
That
selling.
was on an independent label at that time?
Nah, that was AJ Scratch's on Mercury too. That thing just blew up. It was his second single. So, Curtis Blow didn't come down from then, and that's where, Russell got his bread.
Basketball Record was on that album too?
Basketball too, yeah. 8 Million Stories.
8 million. So that was
it's a
I
huge
grew up
album,
off that
man.
album.
The Breaks.
The album used to be in my living room on a love seat.
Yeah, that's a classic. The Breaks was on there. Yeah, that's a classic, man. Curtis Blow made his mark, and
So what made you get into writing? What do you wanted to be, a journalist? I
was bombing trains, man. I love bombing trains. So I was always, a graffiti writer. I was always writing.
Where you from?
I was born in the Bronx.
Okay, BX in the building.
I was born in the Bronx. I lived in Far Rock for 6 years. Shout out to them.
Okay.
And then I moved to Brooklyn when I was 16, and that was it. So out of all the places, I claim Brooklyn because Brooklyn is the first place I ever went to jail. So you could trace it back to jail. That's where I'm from. So I tell people officially I was born in the Bronx, but I was made in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. That's where it is.
So the era of hip hop that you wrote stories about, was there to your heart, or you did it for a paycheck? Because most journalists do stuff for a paycheck. I'm gonna be honest. They don't even care about the music. This is like, yo, I got a paycheck.
Yeah, you're right. No, I was very fortunate to get a paycheck from it, and they paid me very well for it. Russell did. Thank you, and Lior. But it was always from the heart. From the heart. It's, again, for me to say the first hip-hop journalist is because I'm bombing trains, man. That's hip-hop. That's the first element of hip-hop is graffiti. So I'm bombing trains. I'm going over writers. I'm robbing conductors. I'm robbing other writers. Then I'm going to RAL doing bios. After I leave there, I'm going back to Crown Heights. We got a crack team on the street.
Smelling like spray cans and all that.
Smelling like spray cans, all of that. Stealing cars. You know what I'm saying? Next day, bombing trains. Then go back to the office. I'm showing up with ink and paint all over my joints, man. Yeah, I was real to business. So, this was life for me. It was the things that I was writing about is because my best friend was illiterate. So, the first column I ever had was called Radio Graffiti. It was phonetically spelled, and I was the only one doing that, in magazines. Because
what magazine was that?
That was Spin.
Okay.
That was Spin, and that's where it really broke out. It was like, yo, who is this guy? And they thought that I was doing it for a gimmick or, like you said, a paycheck. And, they never knew that it was my best friend who was illiterate. He had to drop out of school because he had to raise his brothers and sisters. Matter of fact, it's his brothers and sisters' kids because his brothers and sisters were on crack. They couldn't raise him. And he had to be an adult, and he was younger than me. So I wanted him to actually experience the success with me, and celebrating it. So I was writing about him, and he couldn't read it. And everybody else in the industry was like, yo, this kid is a hit. This thing is crazy. We never seen anything before like this. It's phonetic. It's exciting. And, finally hip-hop had an alphabet, and I'm showing them how to use it in a sentence. You know what I mean? So
you and Harry Allen was cool?
Yeah, I knew Harry, we were cool, but, it was, writing is a real competitive sport. I mean, we're cool now, because we're older, we're cool now, but I don't, it was really hard for me then, even with the guys who I worked with really closely because I had never been in a writing room before.
What's that like, to be in a writing room, like with a bunch of writers and everybody's antennas is up? It's like, I got the best wordplay. I have the best
idea. It's different because up until that moment, the only writing room I've ever been in was a bullpen. You know what I'm saying, with other writers. And anytime, you gather
that's real
with
critical thinking.
Yo, you're either gonna write with them or you're gonna fight with them. So it's like for me to be at the source, and we're talking about 5 mics and all of that, and that was real different, man, just to have these editorial meetings. But I was also trained for that at the high school newspaper. But to do it for, professionally there with other ones who, these are people in this room that also have a name themselves, people who I respect, that I needed to grow,
Okay.
and it really helped because I love and respected them, So I was proud to be around them. I was proud to be a part of their group, and I would have just, defended them passionately no matter what, because it's all coming from the heart. So if they had beef, I had beef,
basically.
and
That sound like
we
your
never
brother.
had beef.
Sound like Mobb Deep now, right there. Mobb Deep line. Did you do a write up on Mobb Deep before too, right? R.I.P. Prodigy.
That's shout out to the Prodigy.
It's funny because you said if I had beef, you had beef.
Nah, but it's interesting that all the bios that I've done, I've easily done over 100, way over 100. I never wrote about Mobb Deep. I don't think I've ever written about Mobb Deep.
But you and Mobb Deep were so close.
Yeah, I brought them to Island Records. You know what I'm saying? So
you responsible for their success.
Their first deal, deal, and step, and helped them when Matt and Scott took over, and brought them to Loud. Shout out to Steve Riff and Rich Isaacson too. They're great dudes. That label had to be formed for groups like Mobb Deep because there's no other label like that existed before. The unsignable, artists. You know what I mean? The groups that do no commercial songs. That they didn't want no commercial songs at all. So you had to create
cursing in their hooks.
All that. You know what I'm saying? So you had to create a label like that, and then Loud was created, and that's the only label that ever beat Def Jam. You know what I'm saying? At the
beat Def Jam by what though? Not numbers.
That numbers, like creativity, they had down the line like
Def Jam numbers is incredible.
Nah. When you had Pete Rock, Dead Prez, Pun, Mobb Deep, Def Jam couldn't handle that. It was.
What's that? 90? You saying 95
94,
to
95,
94 to 98?
Yeah. That.
But you from that same time, 94,
I wouldn't
98,
say
you
98.
had Mobb Deep. You had Big Pun, the Wu-Tang.
Yeah, Ray and Ghost.
Ray and Ghost. That's 5 years worth for.
It was a runaway train, bro. But those were the days. That was the 90s, and in the 90s, what made my job really so fantastic is that we were in each other's studio. We would listen listen to each other's album while it was being made, and nobody's album sounded the same, man. We had creative push for each other.
Still at that time.
Still sharp and still, man. Every album was fantastic.
You made me better for me listening to your material before the world listened to it.
Word to mother. You play it now, a number like a 3 mic or a 4 mic album sounds like a 5 now because of the trash that's out now. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. New York is the only place that argues about what hip hop is or isn't. Everywhere else in the world,
this is the Mecca.
Yeah, but everywhere else in the world,
don't argue.
They look and dress like this is 86, 89, 92 forever. We have an indelible mark on the world of what hip-hop looks like forever, man. Zulu Nation did that. Rocksteady did that. You know what I'm saying? Wild Style, Crush Groove, all these movies did that. And they're playing all the time. The 90s did that.
Speaking of movies, you was in Juice.
Yeah, that was the first movie. I'm just a real small scene, but behind the scenes, I was a script supervisor for Blackwell because it's an
Chris Blackwell.
Chris Blackwell, who owned Island Records and 4th and Broadway. That's Eric B. and Rakim's label. He also owned Island Film, so Juice is an Island Film. So he said to me, he gave me the script. He said, read this, and then he came back. About a month later or something like that, and he said, what do you think about it? I said, how much you gonna spend? He said, like $3 million. I said, man, spend that. You gonna
so
make
Juice
that
took
for
$3 million to produce?
$3 million. Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
You know, so what, 91, something like that.
So you also was in Life, the movie too, right?
Yeah.
R.I.P. Heavy D. You
Yeah.
was in a scene with him. Y'all was like what, co-defendants? Like,
yeah, that was a jail scene. We
Yeah.
were in prison together, and you know, we had spoken. It was interesting to do that scene. The late great Ted Demme, who is in charge of putting together Yo MTV Raps, which they're about to do a big anniversary on June 1st. Shout out to Fred. He did the movie, and he saw me at Sundance after I did Slam, and he said, I got something for you. So they had us to come out to Sacramento to do this scene, and it just kept raining every day. It was raining for like a month. They had already booked the ticket. It was like pushing it. They couldn't push it back anymore, and they would say, yo, come out, rain or shine. We showed up. It was raining. We get to the set, it stops raining. Sun comes out, we do the scene. As soon as we wrap the scene, it starts pouring again. We leave. It was unbelievable, man. For
and
30
what's the
days.
Sacramento, California?
Yeah, Sacramento. That's on Life. But it's it's fantastic. That's $100 million movie. You know, that's
At that time, 100 million.
easy.
Wow.
You know, it's or close to it. You know, it's certainly made so much. It runs forever because, you know, unfortunately, there's almost like at least almost four people or perhaps four people
That
dead.
passed away in that
passed
movie,
away
yeah.
from that movie, and I think that's the first movie that Martin and Eddie ever did together. So that is always going to play forever. I'm really glad to be a part of that, and I miss Ted. You know, he was a really good dude.
What's up with Saul Williams? You and Saul Williams look real cool, right?
That's my man, Saul.
Yeah.
You know, Saul.
I like his poetry too.
His poetry is
I
off
remember
the
he had
hook.
a Broadway. He did the Tupac.
Yeah, he did Tupac. We were there the opening night.
Yeah.
We were there the opening night. I thought
What was the name of his play? It was on Broadway.
Well, I know the Tupac joint.
What's the name of his play?
But
man?
he's done so many different. He's done so many different projects, and he's lived. You know, and that's the one thing about being successful in your talent and in your craft. You could live any place in the world. You know, and he's raising his family. You know, his daughter, and I mean, this man's talent is just so incredible that, you know, I'm a fan of his work no matter what, forever. Even before we did Slam, you know, I was a fan of his work. And that movie, Slam, is responsible for the Deaf Poetry Slam. You know what I'm saying? That movie came out before that. Matter of fact, I was the first host of the Deaf Poetry Slam. And I did it for Danny Simmons. You know what I'm saying?
That's
Again,
the third brother of the Simmons brothers,
of the
right?
Simmons brothers.
That's the low key one, right? You never get to see Danny.
That's the painter. With Danny's the elder brother.
He's from Brooklyn. He lives in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
right?
we used to live on the same block on
Yeah.
Grand, around the corner from Biggie. So it's just a small world.
That's crazy about Biggie. I was about to ask you about the Biggie. You responsible for the Notorious B.I.G. the video or something like that? The Juicy video?
Nah, not the video. I gave him the title King of New York.
Okay.
I gave him that. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't a title that anybody aspired to in hip hop. It didn't exist.
So you're the origin of crowning somebody the King of New York.
Yeah.
So all these artists is calling themselves King of New York now. They don't have the right to call themselves King of New York.
Man,
unless a journalist.
Nah, it had nothing to do with that. That's it. It's for Biggie. That was for Big. That wasn't a title that anybody could aspire
So
to.
Jay-Z,
that had nothing to do.
Nas,
Nobody. That was for Big. It's on the cover of
Let's
the
get
Source.
this right.
You know what
You
I'm
heard
saying?
this from hip hop
You
journalist
know what it is,
Bonz
B.
Malone.
You know what it is.
The King of New York is for Notorious B.I.G.
Facts, man. You could Google that, man.
So everybody's saying that you're the King of New York. I mean, you can say what you want to say.
You say what you want to say, man, but you ain't
here's the man right
you ain't
here.
getting 5 mics. You know what I'm saying? You getting 5 mics.
And this is the inventor of the 5 mics.
That was for Big. You know, it had to do with his album. He called himself Frank White. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Everybody knows.
So you had the first press release copy of that album before you got the review?
Yeah, we playing it in the Source. You know what I'm saying? Every unsigned person in the country came through the Source.
So you heard Biggie
magazine.
Small's first demo?
I heard the Roots joint. I heard Biggie's joint. I heard Pun. Joey
Big Al?
Crack.
You heard Big Al?
I heard them all, B. Heard them all. we held that thing down. Yeah, listen, I'm not exaggerating because we don't have to. We were a serious, powerful entity in entertainment, man. You know what I'm saying? The Source had shit by the balls, man. We had any unsigned artist in this country.
So let me ask you a question. The total amount of sales of the Source magazine is in the millions and billions, publication-wise?
In the millions.
We're going to go to a commercial break right now. We're here with Bonz Malone. This is Timbo King Live Show. I'm your host, Timbo King.
My name is Sean Cole. Welcome.
Back on the Timbo King Live Show. I'm your host, Timbo King. Special guest, Bonz Malone in the building. Bonz,
Sure.
So let me ask you a question. Now, are you a sneakerhead, man?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I retired though. You
Yeah?
know. I still got a,
What's your
a nice
favorite
collection.
sneaker?
Oh wow.
And why?
Of all or right now?
Let's go with right now.
Right now? Okay, right now, I like the Vapors.
The Vapors.
Yeah, the Vapor Max. The Vapor Max is crack right now, baby. Killing them.
Which color?
I can't front the Mets color, the New York
Okay.
Knicks
You wanna
color,
keep it New York.
that blue with that little orange check.
Like the electric blue? No, it's not electric blue though, right?
It's like that with like not like a turquoise blue. It's the Mets blue,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
The Mets blue, the Knicks blue. The Garden blue with that little orange check. That's the
You ever
killer.
wrote an article about sneakers? Since you did music, you did film,
Yeah, I've
you did
written-
articles about sneakers?
Yeah, I've written.
So
about
Nike
some-
ever got in contact with you, or Adidas? Anybody, a big brand got in contact with you?
I've done like 4 Nike commercials, man.
4 Nike
Yeah,
commercials?
at least, you know what I'm saying. I was the first. I was the voice for the Penny Hardaway, which is really the phone posit, the one that was on the train. You know what I'm saying? New York, the NYC campaign. That was me. They gave me the Reggie Miller sneaker. They were like, do a voice. I said, whose sneaker is it? He said, Reggie Miller. Yo, I threw that thing.
Wow.
I threw that thing all over the studio. I was like, hit that nigga. Yeah, I was screaming. They
So
couldn't play.
I know you got a book coming up soon or something. A movie, scripts. Bonz Malone, man, you're a bright journalist, you're a bright writer, a great person, so.
Thank you, man, it took 20 years, 30 years for me to be here. I started when I was 18, you know what I'm saying? So, my job now is to encourage other people to put their best out, whatever it is, make it your best. Don't slack off, man, not on the music, not on the culture, on nothing. Nothing.
That's great
You know what I'm
advice to
saying?
give to the youth out there.
Word.
This is the Timbo King Live Show. I'm your host, Timbo King. Special guest, Bonz Malone. One love.
I don't care if you young, old, just coming out, coming back out. The record. If you ain't got that record, always about the record. At 21, I admit I was a savage until I got knowledge of self mathematics.